Okay, well, I am seeing our participants trickling in, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody to A Sailor's Life Live. This is a weekly program from the USS Constitution Museum. Each week we are coming to you live with a new topic about life at sea on board USS Constitution in the War of 1812. So my name is Sarah, I'm an educator at the museum, and today we're going to be talking to you about communication at sea. So this is part 2. If you were able to join us a couple of weeks ago about our communication at sea, you heard about 2 examples. Well, we've got 2 brand new examples to talk about today. And if you weren't able to join, that's okay too. You can watch all the previous recordings of our webinars over on the museum's Facebook page. So that's USSCM on Facebook. Now, just like every week, I am joined by a couple of the active duty sailors who interpret USS Constitution. So I want to turn things over to my friends on the ship so they can introduce themselves to you all.
Hi, how you guys doing? My name is Seaman Jay. I'm a contracted hospital corpsman in the United States Navy, and I'm happy to be here today.
Hi everyone, I'm Boatswain Second Class Jacqueline Ditzel. I've been here about 2 years and happy to be here and hanging out with you guys.
Well, great. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Jacqueline. So excited you guys are joining us today. And I'm excited to see what you'll be able to show us over there on the ship. So before we get too much further, I do want to be sure to explain a couple of the features of Zoom here for those of you who are joining us via Zoom. We're going to be using 2 throughout our program today. The first one I want to talk about is the chat feature. So if you have, if I have a question for you guys throughout this program, there are going to be a couple of points when I do. I want you to share your answers with us via chat. So you can do that. There should be, if you're watching on a computer, a button along the bottom of your screen where you can share those answers in chat. And then if you just have questions for us at any point throughout this program, you can use the Q&A feature. So again, that should be a button along the bottom of your screen. Now, I keep mentioning USS Constitution. We've seen our sailors over on the ship itself. But before we get into our content for the day, I want to make sure that we all have a good understanding of this ship, because there's a good chance that some people watching have been to the ship. Maybe you've been to the museum before. You can give us a shout out in the chat if you have. But to give us all kind of a good sense of the ship, Jay, I'm going to ask you to give us a 1-minute rundown of USS Constitution. What is the ship and what makes her so important?
Sounds good. Thank you very much, ma'am. So the USS Constitution is a 222-year-old warship, effectively the oldest commissioned warship still afloat in the United States. She participated in many American wars, such as the Barbary Wars, which was against the Barbary Corsairs who were violating our trade rights and also affecting our economy. And also the U.S. Constitution participated in the War of 1812 when the British was actually impressing our sailors and also violating our trade rights. The USS Constitution is manned by U.S. Navy sailors. We are not just volunteers. Everyone here is an active duty military member, and we're happy to be here and to talk to you a bit about the ship today.
That's great. Thanks so much, Jay. I'm really excited that you guys are over there on the ship and you'll be able to show us some really neat spots related to what we talk about. So no easy task talking about USS Constitution in 1 minute, but thanks for that intro to the ship. So like I mentioned, today we're going to be focusing on one specific aspect of life at sea, and that is communication. Now, communication at sea is really important, just like communicating is important for you and I to do in our lives today. We'll look at 2 examples today of ways sailors were able to communicate with one another on the ship, but also with people who were far away from them on the ship itself. So the first example that we're going to look at, we'll start off by going to the museum's collection, because the museum has hundreds of objects, documents, artifacts related to USS Constitution. And all of these really help us tell the story of the ship, her crew, and its legacy. So in just a moment, I'm going to share on my screen with you all an image of an object from our collection, but I'm not going to reveal what that object is right away because I want us to practice observing this object together. We'll practice our observation skills and we'll think together, make some educated guesses about what this object is, what it might have been used for. So I'll ask you some prompting questions, and if you have any thoughts to share, if you have a guess at what this object is, you can share that in the chat feature. So let me pull up the image of our object now. All right, so we should be seeing shortly, if not already, an image here on the screen. Now, let's take a moment, take in this image, this object from the museum's collection. Let's think together about and observe the shape here. Look at the shape of this object. How does it maybe change from one end to the other? I also want you to think about the texture and the color of this object. So are there parts of it that are shiny? Some other parts maybe that are dull or tarnished even. What could that tell us about this object, how it's used, or maybe what material it's made out of? Let's take a close look at some of the markings that we can see on this object. I'm noticing some in the middle of the object that might be intentional, but there are also some marks along the edges that look like they could just have come from wear and tear. Maybe they're not intentional markings. So what does that tell us about how this object is used? And lastly, let's just think about how big this object is. Do we think it's, really large, or is it small? Is it super heavy, or is it light? And what can all of that tell us about what this object might be? So again, any ideas you have, you guys can share those in the chat. I'm going to take a look here and see if we have any guesses in our chat about what this object might be. Okay, we see someone has guessed this is a horn. That's not a bad guess at all. I see another person here is guessing it is a whistle. It's a pipe. Okay, so you guys are getting some good guesses in there. I think I'm going to go ahead and reveal this object to the group. This object is a bosun's pipe. You can see the title hopefully up at the top of your screen there. So I saw someone in the chat guess exactly a bosun's pipe. We might have some experienced folks or Constitution fans watching us today. But for others watching, if we see that title, bosun's pipe, that might not make it a lot more clear what this object is. So let's break that down word by word. We'll start with a bosun. So a bosun is a specific person on the ship. This is a member of the crew, a specific job or rate within the Navy. And a bosun is responsible for these physical aspects of a ship. On Constitution, that would be pretty much everything except for the hull of the ship. So that kind of wooden body of the ship that mostly sits underwater, that would have been the responsibility of a ship's carpenter. But the bosun and bosun's mates, they are responsible for the rigging, the sails, the deck, all of those other aspects of the ship. So this is a really important job for the bosun and bosun's mates. And then we have a pipe. This is also known as a bosun's whistle or a call even, and I think that makes it even more clear what this object is, because it is essentially a whistle. We have a bosun would use this by blowing into one end here. On the left side, we can even see some marks that might indicate where the bosun would have used it. And then the sound will travel through, the air will travel through this channel all the way to the other side of the pipe. Hard to see in this image, but there is a small hole here. And just like any instrument, woodwind instrument, where you put your fingers over that hole to change the tune or the pitch of a note, that's what happens when you manipulate air around that using this whistle. So a bosun will pipe a particular call, a specific duration and specific pitches that indicates a command for the rest of the crew to follow. This was a really effective way of communicating at sea because I want you to imagine that you're a sailor high up in the rigging on the ship, hundreds of feet in the air, or maybe you're just on the deck of the ship like Jacqueline is now, and there's all kinds of men working around you and waves are crashing against the side of the ship. There's a lot of distracting noise around. Well, this whistle has a really high pitch, so it's going to carry over all of those other noises, and it's an effective way of communicating to a large group of people at once. This is so effective at communicating at sea that we have examples of this from even years before USS Constitution was built in 1797. I want to show you a few of those quickly. So you should see on your screen now 2 examples of pipes or whistles that were used to communicate at sea. Both of these are from the medieval period. So these were used and made from 1400 to 1600 within that period of time. So we can see that even hundreds of years before USS Constitution, these were used to communicate at sea. Here's an image that's a little bit closer to Constitution's time period. This is from 1802, an image from a British ship. If you look closely in this image, you'll see one of the figures is holding a whistle, is holding that pipe. It's even attached, this figure here on the left, to an elaborate chain with kind of a heart-shaped breastplate. So this whistle was really a symbol of the position of that crew member on the ship. I think his shipmate over on this side of him is pretty interesting too. He has kind of a interesting expression on his face. If you guys have any words that come to mind to describe how he might be feeling based on what we can see in this image, feel free to share that in the chat. But when I look at him, I definitely see someone who might have had a bit of a long day. It's definitely hard work working on these ships in the 19th century. But bosun's whistles and calls, bosun pipes, these are still used today. Here's an example, just a modern image of someone using this in a bit more of a ceremonial purpose. You can see the way that it's held to from this image. Now, I could show you guys all kinds of images of the pipe and how they've been used throughout time, but we've got Jacqueline over there on the ship itself who can demonstrate for us in real time how this pipe works and how these calls go. So Jacqueline, can you tell us a little bit more about a bosun, being a bosun's mate, and give us some examples of those calls?
Yes, Sarah, thank you. All right, first and foremost, I'm bosun mate, second class Jacqueline Ditzel again. Being a bosun mate, it's one of the oldest grades in the Navy. You're pretty much in charge of all the vigorous activities that are going to be on board the ship. Back then, they'd be in charge of all the riggings and the sails, the small boats and the anchoring, and then the cables. All in all, the ship's bosun would be the subject matter expert for, but we all work for him individually. But the one thing that we really do now that we did back then is have the bosun pipe. So I'm going to show you guys 3 calls that we make. Beware that it might be a little loud, and then after that I'm going to tell you a little bit about each call that we made. So that call right there is the attention call. That's for any word that's being passed regularly throughout the day, just to get anybody's attention. If somebody has to report to the quarterdeck, the bosun mate would pipe that call and pass the word after that. And then here goes the second one. That call right there is reveille. So that is the first call that every sailor hears at 0600 on any ship. That's the call that was made for everybody to get up out of their racks and their hammocks, make their bed, and get ready to go work for the day. And then the last one is going to be that call right there is called overside or alongside. That call is made when any higher officer or dignitary is coming on board the ship. There's usually side boys associated with that. We're saluting the officer coming through the quarterdeck onto the brow until they get to the place of being.
Great, thank you so much, Jacqueline. How long did it take you to learn all these different calls and how to play them?
So I learned them all. There's about 7 to 8 calls, and you can't get your first bosun pipe until you learn every single one of them. So you have to learn them all. It took me about 2 weeks to master it.
Wow, that's impressive, because there's just subtle differences there. And I thought my alarm was loud in the morning, but if you guys or people are hearing that at 6 a.m., that'll definitely get you out of bed or out of your hammock, right? So we really got a sense there of just how loud this whistle can be, and that high-pitched note, how that can carry over so many other noises. So thanks so much, Jacqueline, for sharing that with us. All right, so I'm going to talk now about our second form of communication with you guys. Now this form of communication at sea, this is something that's probably a bit more familiar to everybody watching, because it's something that you and I can use right now to communicate with people, and that is letter writing. So if I wanted to write a letter this very minute, I could log into my email right now, type a quick message out, hit send, and that would almost instantaneously arrive to whomever I was sending that to. If I wanted to do something a little bit more traditional, I could head over, grab a piece of paper, write a message out with a pen or a pencil, and then maybe draw a picture. If I wanted to send a card, I could mail that through the mail, and it would arrive, again, probably in just a matter of days. So this is something that we might do regularly today. It did look a little bit different for crew members on board Constitution in 1812. First off, they were using different instruments to write with. So traditionally, crew members at this time would be using a quill and ink to write their letters. An ink stored in an inkwell, like this ceramic one here. And a quill, mine's a little bit dirty, it's well used. You can see, hopefully, that there's a bit of a pointed tip here. So that allows you to kind of get the ink, it will travel up the channel there. And they would simply write on a piece of paper with this, let their ink dry, fold up their letter, seal it. Maybe they had a wax seal that was unique to the sender so that you knew exactly who that was coming from. But it would probably take a matter of months for that letter to arrive wherever its destination was. Now, I do also want to note that a bit about who would have been doing most of the letter writing at this time, because not everyone on the ship's crew in 1812 would have known how to read and write. Certainly officers in training, these were men who came from higher standing in society, so they had really formal education where they would have been taught these skills of reading and writing. And it was a key part of their jobs to keep up with that correspondence on the ship. Now, for the enlisted men, not all of those men would have known how to read and write, but a good number of them could have written home to their friends and their family, certainly. It's a way of kind of keeping connected while you're out at sea for months at a time or in different parts of the world entirely. Officers in training, they certainly would have written home to their families as well. But as I mentioned, that was just a key part of their jobs too. It was how they conducted business. They would write to other officials in the government, in the Navy. It helped them stay informed on certain things and also helped them make decisions on what their next actions were going to be. Now, in the museum's collection, we have many different letters from different crew members on the ship over the years, and these really help us understand more about how these men were thinking and feeling during this time. Also, just a bit more about their jobs, because those letters survived 200 years later. I want to focus today on what I think has to be the coolest letter in the museum's collection. So I'll pull up a photo of it now so that we can all see it on the screen. You should see an image of that letter on your screen now. And I'm sure you're thinking, this looks like any other letter that I've seen from this time period. I'm not sure what is so cool about it. I'll explain a little bit to you guys now. So we're looking at two different views of the same letter. On the left side of the screen, there's an image of the message written in regular ink, ink derived from natural resources. It has faded a bit over 200 years. That's why it's kind of this light brown color now. But it looks like a regular letter, right? We have up here Dear Sir written, kind of that formal greeting of the time. I see a date up at the top, 1804, a signature down on the bottom. We're also looking at another view of this letter. Here on the right-hand side, we have the back side of the letter. I see some creases where it looks like it's been folded before, and maybe some faint writing there as well. Well, what we're really looking at here is the same letter, but two separate messages, because on the image on the left, we have our regular letter, again, written in regular ink, but on the right, we have a message that is written in invisible ink. So you're probably wondering why someone would have to write a message in invisible ink in 1804. Well, I'll tell you guys the story of this letter. So it all centers around this man here. This is a portrait of William Bainbridge. Now, Bainbridge is really famous in Constitution's history because he was one of the captains of the ship during the War of 1812. He and the crew were victorious in the engagement against HMS Java in that war. But about 10 years before the War of 1812, Bainbridge was involved in one of those conflicts that Jay mentioned earlier on, the Barbary Wars. This was an important conflict in the early United States history because we had a bit of a problem with a group known as corsairs in the Mediterranean Sea. These corsairs, we can think of them like legal pirates, basically, because they were given permission by the government to steal goods from other ships and other vessels. You might have heard the word privateer before. That's kind of a more Western tradition for the same type of person. But these corsairs were causing some issues for American trade. So the Navy was sent over to the Mediterranean Sea to help with this conflict there. Now, Bainbridge at the time, he was in charge of a ship called USS Philadelphia, and he quite literally ran into a bit of a problem off the shore of Tripoli. So we're looking here at an image that depicts this. Tripoli is on the northern coast of Africa, and we see here that Philadelphia has run aground. This ship has hit the bottom of the sea there, and there is nowhere for the ship to go because the sails are unfurled. They're kind of sitting there while their enemy continues to attack them. So in this position, Bainbridge, he really has no choice but to surrender the ship. And after doing so, he is imprisoned by the Tripolitans, and he's in prison in Tripoli. That's where our letter comes back into play here, because Bainbridge, he was allowed to write letters from prison. So here we see that he is writing a letter to a man named Tobias Lear. Lear was a peace envoy. He was a bit more of a diplomatic role during the Barbary Wars. But no matter who he wrote to, every word that Bainbridge wrote would have been read by his captors, by the Tripolitans. So he had to be really careful about the message he was sending. That's why he uses invisible ink to share really important information for the Americans in this conflict. And he uses something that you and I might have in our houses right now as ink. He uses lime juice. Lime juice has some properties that allows it to dry completely if you use it as a regular ink on paper. And then when you apply heat to that ink, it slowly reveals itself. It turns a darker color, and almost like magic, that invisible message is revealed. So I'm going to do a demo for you guys now so that you can see exactly how this all works. You're going to need a couple of things with you if you want to do your own invisible ink message at home. So first off, you'll need your ink, right? We know that Bainbridge used lime juice, so you can use a lime. If you have a lemon on hand, you can use lemon juice as well. That will work really well for this. If you don't have any fresh fruit with you, you can use concentrated juice too. You'll want to put some of that in a bowl, something that you can easily access for your ink. Now, I'll be writing my message with a quill. Happen to have one with me. If you don't have a quill, that's okay. You can use a Q-tip or your finger, really anything you can use to kind of dip in that ink and spread across the paper. You will need paper to write your message on. And then, as I mentioned, you'll need a heat source because that's just how this message reveals itself. Now, today for this demo, I will be using an iron. We have one of these in our house, and I'm able to do that. Any students watching, I want to be sure to note that you should definitely check in with an adult about this heat source to get permission to use something like an iron, or you can even get some help from that adult. You guys can do this together as well. But this will work well for our purposes today. So I'm going to adjust my camera a bit here so that you all can see my writing surface. And you'll simply dip your quill or your Q-tip into your ink and go on and write your message. Now, a couple notes as you write this. You'll want to be sure to use an appropriate amount of juice, because if you use too little, your message will be really faint and it won't show up when you apply the heat source. But if you use too much, you'll find that it starts to soak through the paper. So it might take you a couple tries to get that perfect amount, but you'll find what works best for you. So there, I've written my message using my lime juice. You might be able to see, you might not. It's pretty shiny right now. One important step in this is that you give your message a few moments to dry, but we don't have to wait around for that now. I'm going to use one that I did earlier today that is completely dry. I can run my hand across the area where I wrote the message, and there's no lime juice left. So here's our invisible message. I'm going to go ahead and add my heat source so that we can slowly see it start to reveal itself. I did make sure to put a notebook, a piece of cardboard and paper underneath my iron so that I'm not directly ironing on top of my table here. We want to be safe whenever you're using these heat sources. But I want to talk a bit about what's happening as our message slowly starts to reveal itself here. So lime juice, lemon juice, many fruit juices actually, these have carbon compounds in them. And what's happening here as we apply heat to those carbon compounds is that they're starting to break down, and that the heat and the access to the air, the oxygen, is causing a chemical reaction known as oxidation. That is what is slowly turning our message here into this golden brown color. And I'll get my last corner. We can see hopefully a little more clearly now our message has turned into that golden brown. I'll move my camera up again so that we can see together. Our message, huzzah, her sides are made of iron. You've probably heard us say that before in relation to Constitution history. This quote is where we get her nickname, Old Ironsides. But there you have it. This is 19th century invisible ink. You can see just how easy it is to do something like that at home. Now, I want to acknowledge that, of course, Bainbridge or Tobias Lear, the man he sent that letter to, they wouldn't have had this iron in their home, right? That's certainly a technology they don't have access to at this time. So how are they revealing this message in 1804? Well, Lear, when he received the letter, he probably used a heat source like a candle. So that open flame of the candle, he would hold the letter over that flame until it slowly started to reveal itself. And just so we're not left hanging about Bainbridge, last we left him, he was writing that message from prison over in Tripoli. He eventually does get released because the Americans are victorious in Tripoli, kind of a multifaceted effort. Certainly the Marines played a part if you heard their hymn, but also Commodore Edward Preble and some young naval officers helped with the ultimate victory there. Now, those young naval officers will go on in the War of 1812 to be the ones to lead the effort in that war. And we know William Bainbridge, of course, at that time, he ascends to become the captain of USS Constitution by the time we arrive there. So when Bainbridge is captain on USS Constitution, there's a special area of the ship where he spends a lot of time, and that's an area where he really would have been doing a lot of this correspondence. He would have been reading his letters, writing his letters from this spot on the ship. So I want to turn things back over to my friends on USS Constitution, and Jay is going to show us around that area of the ship.
Thank you, ma'am. Wow, what a great discussion about leadership and captains of the USS Constitution. Something I like to emphasize, part of that story about William Bainbridge, is though although his reputation was stained in the incidents known as the Philadelphia incident, where he crashed or ran aground a ship of the line on foreign shores. Although his reputation was damaged by that, he later went on to serve aboard the USS Constitution and win a very, very difficult battle against the HMS Java, where he was actually apprehended by both of his legs being cut and impaled by copper on the very aft part of our ship, right by our binnacle. Just saying, or just to emphasize that although reputations and mistakes can be made in the past, what you do with the future is what really counts and saves your reputation, right? So let's talk about the captain's cabin. Let's talk about where Bainbridge actually lived. This is an exclusive part of the ship that's not available on regular portions of our tour. So I'm very excited to have you here. The compartment we're in right now is actually where William Bainbridge, Isaac Hull, Charles Stewart, along with many other great captains in USS Constitution history would have slept. This bed right here. And the scuttlebutt around the ship is that sometimes our current captain actually comes in here and sleeps, but I can neither confirm nor deny that.
You just follow me in here, you'll notice that there is a great view of Boston Harbor, including the Boston skyline. And something that may protrude you, or you may wonder, is why is this room here? Well, just to emphasize the idea of luxury and how officers enlisted were very different, especially the captain. This is the captain's own private head, or as you may know it, a restroom, right? So what would happen is the captain would come in here in the privacy of his own wardrobe. He'd have a little compartment like this, except there'd be a hole just about this size leading down directly to the ocean floor. And it may not seem it, ladies and gentlemen, but this was the height of luxury. This was the captain's own personal private room, which a lot of sailors on board did not actually have, with the exception of the officers and warrant officers. So we're gonna move back out right here, talk a little bit more about the wardroom. And then just in addition to great leaders attached to the USS Constitution, John F. Kennedy actually used to come to this very ship when he was a very young boy. Matter of fact, the Kennedy name has a lot of ties with the USS Constitution, as his great-great-grandfather actually, he proposed in Congress that we bring Constitution back to Boston, right, ladies and gentlemen? So now we are in one of the living rooms, if you will, of the captain's cabin. This is where the captain would go to make plans, or he would entertain guests in here, as a matter of fact. In addition to that, if you look out or towards the stern of our ship, you'll see 3 windows. Now, during battle, these windows could actually be utilized as aft chasers. What these windows allowed for us to pull in our guns through these windows and to actually attack the enemy from behind. This is very, very crucial during the Great Escape, where we had to evade not only 2, not only 3, but 5 British warships who were all headed straight for us. It was a very skilled and tactful chase, if I do say so myself. And then right here, we have a news article from the Boston Sunday Globe. Old Ironsides, 100 years old. This is something that you would not be able to see on your regular tour on board the USS Constitution during normal working hours. We look right here, we have 3 of our most famous captains. We have William Bainbridge, who we were talking about earlier, who won the battle against the HMS Java. He was an individual who was actually impaled with copper through his legs. And then we have Isaac Hull, who accomplished the Great Chase, or the Great Evasion, against the 5 British ships, who also went on to win the Battle of the HMS Guerriere. And then finally, right here, we have Charles Stewart. Now, Charles Stewart is special in the fact that he actually used this ship to take on 2 British ships simultaneously. And guess what, ladies and gentlemen? He succeeded. He won those 2 engagements, or 1 engagement, if you will, with 2 enemy ships. And then if you look right here, we have the ship's kilometer. Like we were talking about earlier, the officers and the captains are a lot more educated. So this tool would be utilized as sort of a navigational tool, as to measure how the rock and roll of the ship, how in depth and to what degree that the ship was at. Then we're going to go over here. Now this room right here is exactly the same as the captain's bedroom, right? This would just be utilized if we had special guests on board, such as Henry Wise when we took him to Brazil. He was our ambassador to Brazil, and we actually let him sleep inside this room. Had the same accommodations as far as the head, and you could keep little things like clothes or anything else in these drawers right here. We're going to come back out, and we're also going to talk about this right here. Now, you may not be able to make it out on camera, but this is actually a bell. Now, this bell will be utilized to actually, or it is still utilized to baptize or christen babies. An extreme honor of which our actual captain's, I believe it was his nephew, who was actually baptized on board the ship in this bell. So very, very cool. In addition to that, like I was saying, these walls are, well, this room could actually be utilized as a battle room, right? If you needed to use more guns, you could actually take these bulkheads down, or these walls down, put them away, store them down the warlock deck, and utilize these guns right here. Everything could, ladies and gentlemen, have a list of all individuals who've been christened on board the ship. See right here, Theodore John Benda. I believe that's John Benda's son. Excuse me, it was a son. Sorry. So that's very, very interesting in its own fact, or it's in its own being. And then right here you have a table. Like I was saying, that aft room would actually be utilized as a living room. However, during normal times or non-battle times, this room would be the primary area where the captain would work. He would put out charts right here, talk with his officers about what needed to be done, discuss morale, discipline, battle plans, where they're going. This is where it all happened, ladies and gentlemen. And with that being said, I believe this room is probably one of the more significant and important rooms for the USS Constitution. As I was saying earlier, this is where the battles were out, and effectively, after they've been planned, the USS Constitution's name in American history forever. Thank you.
Wow, Jay, thank you so much. That was such a thorough tour of the captain's cabin there. We got to see so many spaces where those great men that you mentioned led the ship, where battles were even happening. I think it's pretty funny to know that legend has it, even Captain Benda is taking some naps in the captain's cabin today. So certainly a great spot on the ship to see, related to our captain we were focused on today with his special letter writing, Bainbridge. So thank you so much for that thorough behind the scenes look at the captain's cabin. So we hope you guys enjoyed this program today. We're running pretty close to our time, but I just want to thank everybody for joining us, hopefully learning some more about the importance of communication on this vessel, whether you're communicating with your shipmates with that bosun's pipe, or if you're communicating with people miles and miles away with a letter or even a secret message. My challenge for everybody this week is to think of someone in your lives who maybe you haven't been able to see in person in a while, or someone you just want to say hi to, and write them a letter. I hope all of us know just how fun it is and how special it is to receive a message in the mail, a special note. And if you guys are feeling really up to it, you can write a message in invisible ink and teach that person how to reveal the message. Teach them a little bit about what you learned today. So thank you everybody so much for joining us. If you enjoyed this, we have a lot more resources over on the museum's website. So go to usscm.org. We have online resources from our collection. We have activities you can print out and do at home. We even have online games for you to explore. So lots of fun over there. And we're posting about it every day on social media. So be sure to check us out there too. Jay and Jacqueline, do you guys have any final words for our group before we sign off here?
No, thanks for having us. Stay
All
safe
right.
out there.
Thank you so much, guys. You guys were great. It was so fun working with you. Thanks to our cameraman behind the scenes as well. We really appreciate all of you guys showing us those great spots on the ship. I want to be sure to shout you out though, because every day the ship is doing virtual tours at 10 a.m. So be sure to tune into those if you want to hear from more of these guys and their shipmates about the ship. So thanks again so much for joining us. Feel free to tune in next week. We'll be back on Wednesday afternoon with a whole new aspect of life at sea on board Constitution. So thanks everyone for joining, and we'll see you next time. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Bye.